Good morning, good afternoon. Hello and a warm welcome to everyone joining us from wherever you are for Embracing the Crypto Revolution, Positioning the BVI as a Global Hub for Virtual Assets, Part 1. I am Elise Donovan, the CEO of BVI Finance, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's session. The BVI is making significant headway in the virtual assets arena. Proactive steps, including the Sandbox Initiative and the Virtual Asset Service Providers legislation, have positioned the BVI as a dynamic player in this field. The interest we've garnered is evident from the 60-plus VASP applications currently under review by the BVI Financial Services Commission. Today's webinar, the first part of our series, will spotlight the BVI's evolving role in the global crypto ecosystem. We're excited to have a panel of experts who bring a wealth of experience and insights. In part 2, we'll delve deeper into the regulatory aspects of this field and be joined by the regulator and other experienced panelists. But first, let's get our distinguished panelists for today's discussion. Ronan Kushai, CEO of DTL Solutions, has been a force in the blockchain and Web3 space since 2018. His expertise in guiding top-tier projects and his entrepreneurial spirit led to the creation of DLT Solutions, a hub for bespoke blockchain advisory services. Ludwig Van Sutton, Director and Chief Risk Officer at DLT Solutions and Director and General Counsel at Triley Tech, brings a wealth of knowledge from his work in financial services, both traditional and blockchain-based. His experience extends from global asset management firms to innovative blockchain projects. Kyla Lidlaw, Tax Director at Deloitte BVI, is an authority in the global tax compliance, advising clients throughout the Caribbean. Her 12-year tenure at Deloitte underscores her deep understanding of tax transparency and reporting requirements. Iona Wright, a Senior Counsel at Walkers, specializes in financial services regulation, and with over a decade of experience, she offers invaluable insights into the legal landscape of virtual assets. Michael Killory, partner at Ogier, is known for his expertise in corporate finance and fintech. His guidance is crucial for businesses navigating the evolving world of financial technology. We're going to have a very lively discussion today, and we also want to hear from you too. We've developed a live poll on Slido, so I'm going to introduce that now so that you can download. So it's hashtag 2773418 slido.com. You can do the QR code and join us for our live poll. Before we start on the discussion or introduce our panelists, I'll let our panelists open their mics and just say hello. And before we start the live poll. So the first poll, give us 2 words that describe what the crypto revolution means to you. Give us 2 words what the crypto revolution means to you. Again, the QR code is up on the screen, and you can also go to slido.com. Okay, we are seeing innovation, risk, and innovation, opportunity, uncertainty, risky. Somebody says mumbo jumbo. Somebody says a bit scary. Someone says it has potential, opportunities, the future, work, regulation, greed, opportunity to make some, cybersecurity, shady. So there's a plethora of thoughts that come to you when you describe the crypto revolution. So Ronan, you are described, or we described you as a force in the blockchain arena. What are the trends and developments? You've seen what all our audience has to say about what the revolution means to them, but what does it mean and what are the trends taking place in the global crypto space?
Thanks, Elise, and it's great to see so many of our fellow cryptopians from the BVI's professional service
Ronan,
community.
we can't, oh, sorry.
So thanks, Elise. It's great to see so many of our fellow cryptopians from BVI's professional service community. We have a vast array of registered agents, law firms, accounting firms, regulators, bespoke service providers, government employees, and I think even the odd NGO. So it seems we're all part of this great digital transformation. I'm going to discuss trends and developments shaping the global crypto space, highlighting opportunities and risks for investors and businesses, as well as sharing perspectives on the potential impact for global finance. So from my side, I've been working with and investing in blockchain since 2018. One thing I'm always mindful of is this is a dynamic space, which like many specializations revels in its own jargon and can be guilty of wallowing in its own acronym soup. So I'd suggest we all keep Google open, and when you encounter a new term, project or concept, look it up as you go, and by all means send questions in the chat as we go. Learning should be interactive. All of this information is online and readily accessible, whether that's from YouTube, Discord, Telegram channels, or Twitter. For the older of us that like to learn by books or audio books, I'd recommend the following. Digital Gold by Nathaniel Popper. That's the story of Bitcoin, Mt. Gox, and the Silk Road. Secondly, Blockchain Revolution by Alex and Don Tapscott. That's the story of Ethereum and the potential of smart contracts. And one book I enjoyed last year was The Metaverse by Matthew Ball. That's a study on the problems of building and scaling a metaverse and a detailed analysis on how big tech and big gaming operate today. For those of you that prefer to listen to a YouTube video in your car or on your morning walk, check out Coin Bureau, which is a library of 20-minute videos on projects and concepts. And secondly, every meaningful project, client of yours indeed, has a whole host of free online educational material and courses. Embrace research and learning, and be careful of the hype merchants and misinformation out there. DYOR, do your own research. So what's going on in the space at the moment? The SEC continues to wage war on the large centralized exchanges, with Kraken being the latest high-profile case. Binance are weathering high-profile CFTC and DOJ actions. All of this less than a year since Terra Luna, 3 Arrows, and FTX all went under. So why are we still talking about this? Why are clients still setting up blockchain-related entities in the BVI? We should, I believe, view blockchain and crypto as a technology rather than a token or asset class or passing fad. New technologies bring innovation, speculation, and unfortunately, the odd fraudster and badly governed startup. The US railroad expansion in the late 1800s, the oil rush, all were plenty with tales of human greed and folly. The railroads were built, the combustion engine replaced the horse, and in due course, the internet replaced the letter and telegram. FTX, like Madoff before, was a tale of greed and folly rather than proof that blockchain is a non-starter. We see increased attempts to merge the worlds of computer gaming with blockchain, to employ tokens and non-fungible tokens, NFTs, into these valuable gaming ecosystems. We see sports teams, brands, music, fashion, and art looking to embrace these new technologies as tools for customer acquisition, engagement, and reward. Think not of tokens as assets or money, but rather entries on a ledger, rewards for your viewing attention, addiction to coffee, or perhaps air miles. There is a value to our time, attention, and loyalty. So many of these projects are trying to solve digital identity, enable exchange of value, and disrupt existing big tech, which makes money from the data and value of our attention, likes, and networks. So what I'm going to do now is bring in Ludwig, who is General Counsel for Trilitech, which is an investment arm of the Tezos blockchain. I think it's very useful for him to talk about why he chose the BVI as their business-friendly home.
Yes, thank you, Ronan, and delighted to be here today and talk about something that fascinates me to no end. I was first in the BVI from 2020 and 2021 when I was at Walker's doing a lot of DeFi work, as it's called. We're not supposed to use acronyms, so decentralized finance work. I'm not sure that explains it if I say what that means. So what I would like to do today is briefly talk about the technology itself, right? Because if you, I thought it was beautiful to see all those words come up just now, and there's an element of so you see risk, you see I don't know what it is, you see all sorts of concepts coming up, and in the end, what it is, and it takes a little while to, at least it took me a little while to realize that, and maybe others have already, but really the best way to look at the technology and the great innovation is to see the network that maintains the blockchain as a public computer. So I'm pausing on purpose because what does that mean in practice? What it means is that instead of having to go to a single server, be that hosted by Amazon or whomever, and put your code on that server, you can now go to a network and basically put your code on the network. And if you realize that, then you realize what the immense opportunity must be in the future to move from reliance on a cloud or something like that that is controlled and monopolized to reliance on a public structure that's out there that isn't depending on one or two people working together, because there will be thousands of nodes that maintain the network, and therefore you can access that and deploy code. So make that practical. Bitcoin was the first blockchain protocol that was invented. That was sort of the invention of the wheel, so to speak. And it can do only one thing. It can move Bitcoin tokens around. So it's fairly limited in its opportunity. Then came Ethereum, and what it did was allow people to deploy a piece of script, this code, onto the public computer, which could then run itself. And with that means that you can, the limit to the use of the public computer, the network, is the sort of what you can code or cannot code. So what at first was useful, of course, is to create tokens, but you don't have to do just that. You can also code a little black box, put it on the public computer, and make it exchange things, such as Uniswap, for instance. So once you realize that, you start seeing that looking at it from the perspective of a crypto asset or the risk is the wrong way around, right? You wouldn't look at the internet and define it by references to email, right? Because that's not what it is. It's a network, and you can do all sorts of things. You can spin up domains, etc., etc. So if you take that one step further to sort of follow up what Ronan was just talking about, what's happening in the space, you should look at it from a risk perspective. You should look at it, what is the code on the network used for, right? So if it's a Dogecoin, for instance, which I always find a wonderful example of the wonders of human imagination, right? Because what that is really is just a piece of code gone on to the network, and it creates a record of ownership of Dogecoins, and they become tradable at that point. But that's all it is, right? It's the power of this network where you can have a public record of ownership that can be manipulated only by the person who has the private key. So if you take it one step further from that, you can say, well, hang on a minute, if it's a register on a public computer that everybody can see, but that can only be manipulated in accordance with consensus rules and private keys and cryptography, so it's secure and safe, well, why don't we make it a record of something else, like, for instance, a shareholder register? So you can, there's no reason not to put the shareholder register in a smart contract, as it's called, the piece of code on the chain. It does exactly the same as it would do if it's an Excel spreadsheet on a central server, right? And once you start seeing that, you start realizing that when you deal with these projects, as they're called, they're just businesses that using this sort of technology to do the same old thing, but in a different way, right? So don't be, what I would say is don't be scared of it, because it is learnable. You don't have to understand how the consensus mechanism works and what all the math behind it is. So there is an element of trust in the chain will work. What you need to understand is you can deploy code on the chain, and that code can do anything that what you want, as long as it's codable and it's logical, right? So you can do an ownership register of a piece of IP, picture of Ronaldo, for instance. What your token would be is the proof of your ownership of that picture. So basically proof of the copyright. And you can take that all the way through. I've already given the example of shares. And all the way at the other end is what I said, Dogecoin or any other tokens that are not connected to so-called real-world assets, but they're still simply a record of ownership. So the risk around it is defined by the sort of use case that you're using it for, right?
Okay.
And
Thank you very much, Ronan and Ludwig. Mike, I want you to look at the screen again and look at all the words that have been placed in terms of what does the crypto revolution mean, and also give your input on this question.
Well, I am, and I don't know whether I have a different screen from anybody else, but I'm happy to say that my own input onto this screen, to me at least, appears to be the largest word. So I can see opportunity as being the right in front of me, center to this. I don't know whether that's because I put it in, or maybe lots of other people agreed. Like to think it was the latter, but you never know. But to me, it's that it's opportunity for not just for me as a lawyer and somebody that advises on this, and so personally I have an opportunity, but it's an opportunity for everybody and a lot of people. So it's an opportunity for the world in the sense that digital assets, tokenization, it's in some respects a form of democratization of investment opportunity for everybody. It lowers barriers to getting involved in markets. It opens up investment to a bunch of people that probably wouldn't have been involved in that area before. You might say, well, that increases risk. Well, yeah, it probably does increase risk, but with every opportunity comes risk, and that's just the way things are. And then that's the function of the regulators to step in and try and minimize that risk to some extent. But there is always going to be risk with opportunity. And equally, it's an opportunity very specifically for us here in the Virgin Islands. Over the years, and certainly since about 2017, these islands have become increasingly attractive to people setting up in the virtual asset space. I'm going to try and use, I'm not going to talk so much about crypto or use that word, but we can talk about that in a minute when I've finished doing. I'm going to talk about virtual assets or digital assets, because they pretty much cover everything in this space, or even digital revolution as a term, because You know, the world of the digital asset, the smart contract is a lot more than just Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of things out there in blockchain. But you know, what is the opportunity for the BVI? Well, a lot of people are interested in coming to the BVI to set up and to use the infrastructure, the legal infrastructure, the professional infrastructure that we already have, which is very attractive for other businesses. And they are attracted by it. I mean, you know, you look at the basics that we have right in the BVI right now. We've got, of course, economic stability as an island. The sort of the usual things that we always advertise ourselves as having: low incorporation, maintenance costs, tax neutrality, exchange controls, or we don't have any of those. Corporate flexibility, and that's very important. And what that means is that we've got very flexible, very well known, very well liked BVI Business Companies Act, which has been proved incredibly popular over the years, but is actually now quite adept at dealing with a lot of digital asset structures that are being put together. Equally, we have a brand new and very versatile limited partnership act, only came in 2017, sorry, and that we've been looking at that, a group of us, and we found that actually that is very adept for certain digital asset structures. We've been, I won't go into all the details of the various structures that you might have associated with digital asset projects. So I don't know whether anybody's mentioned decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, and things like that, and these communities that exist out there in the ether, that aren't companies, there aren't partnerships, but they can vote using smart contracts and control structures and things like that. There's a whole new world, but I'm not going into details. But there are aspects of BVI legislation which we already have. We don't need to go up and get new legislation that lend themselves to these structures and other kinds of digital asset structure. So, you know, we've got great bed infrastructure for some of these projects. We also have access to a global talent pool. There are, I mean, you see the people on this call, ignore me, but we've got real experts in the BVI on the advisory side. We have real experts actually on the audit, the accounting side, which is going to become more and more important for a lot of virtual asset business in BVI. On the tax side, and you've got Kayla there. We have got trust companies, registered agents, other service providers who are, you know, they are leading experts in traditional financial fields. But a lot of them now are becoming interested and involved on the virtual asset side, because in some respect, you know, you have to. People are looking at BVI. This is a lot of business is coming from this area. And I'm going to let Iona talk about a little bit about the sort of the specifics of what we call the efficient regulatory environment for virtual assets, which are the various bits of new legislation and facilities that we have. But just before I go on to Iona, I just want to make a pitch again for education and perspective that Ronan and Ludwig we're talking about, that, you know, it is very important to become educated in this area, because I think when you look at those words on the screen and we're talking about mumbo jumbo, what else is in here? Well, there's risk. There'll always be risk. There's a bit scary. Well, you know, things are mumbo jumbo and things are a bit scary if you don't really understand what it's about. So educating yourself in the area, I think, is critical. And I'll just make a pitch. Actually, there's a very good book that's out there, which it's probably getting a little bit old now, but it's a book called, if anybody wants this, I can send them a link. Called Crypto Assets: The Innovative Investor's Guide to Bitcoin and Beyond. And it's by a couple of gentlemen called Chris Bernisk and Jack Tartar. I read that book, and it's great, this book, because it's framed for folks who are already knowledgeable in sort of traditional investment and traditional financial world. But then it introduces you to the world of digital assets. And, you know, one of the things that they make the point on that is that when it's almost as when you say the word crypto these days, it's taken as a pejorative term. I don't know why, you know, because of the association with whatever else has happened in the virtual asset world, or maybe it just reminds people of horror movies, like it's a crypt or something, or there's some badness coming out of that. But yeah, as Ludwig just explained, crypto it's just cryptography. You know, it's encoding and decoding. It's how the digital world works. So let's all cozy up to crypto in a way and embrace it. It's it sounds bad, but it isn't. And the other thing to say is that you have to have perspective here that there are scandals, fraud, there are bad actors associated with the world of virtual assets, digital assets, but that world doesn't have a monopoly on any of those things. That all of those things have been going around really since the world started making money in one way or another, and they're all endemic to the traditional securities world as well. So yeah, education and perspective, and keep that in mind. And Iona, sorry, handing over to you to talk about more specific virtual asset.
Before we go to Iona, Mike, I just wanted to, I know you said you're not sure why, but I wanted for you to just say something about why BVI. I know we traditionally have a number of, you said economic stability, legal, professional.
Why more than that BVI? Because
what makes us specifically attractive? And I just wanted to say to our audience, you can put your questions in the Q&A section, and we will get to them. So please put your questions in the Q&A section. It's right there. I'm pointing to it. If you can see, I'm still sharing screen. But there's a whole host of you said it's seen as a pejorative term, and I'm not understanding why it's seen as a pejorative term. Can you get into that more and explain to us why the BVI, and then do we want something that is seen as pejorative to be something that is one of the highest growth areas in the jurisdiction?
Yeah, I think, I mean, dealing with, this was a conversation we had before we started this call. We were trying to limit the use of the word or part of the word crypto, because it's become seen as pejorative. I think that that's partly because, it's something that we keep going back to this. It's something that is misunderstood. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try and explain how everything works, because I probably couldn't, and we'd be here all day. But I think educating yourself, as we've just said, in what this revolution is all about, it would be an important way, or at least a way, of reducing your concern or your trepidation in relation to this. Now, look, it's also something. We look at Bitcoin and these cryptocurrencies, something that almost appeared overnight and suddenly gained a lot of value very quickly, and also lost a lot of value very quickly. So it's volatile, and so that makes people nervous. They don't want to be dealing with anything that goes up and goes down very quickly, because you could easily, make a lot of money, but also equally lose a lot of money. Some of the attributes of it that I described, the sort of democratization, the ease of getting into it, that creates concerns too. Is it too easy for people to invest in crypto? Is it too easy for them to enter into these risks? Are the wrong people getting involved in it? I mean, I remember when we had the literary festival here, and Professor Krugman speaking, and he was saying something about, maybe there is too democratization of investment, because there were or democratization through the use of cryptocurrencies because there was a Bitcoin vending machine in a supermarket, and he said, "Oh well, I don't think that's a great thing because maybe the wrong people are getting involved in it." Which I thought was an awful thing to say, really. I mean, just because there was a Bitcoin vending machine in a supermarket doesn't necessarily mean the wrong people are involved in it. But I think, and then of course you have the various scandals and the fact that transactions in cryptocurrency are perceived as being somehow illicit or veiled or underhand, because there isn't a central state player involved here, so there's not a central state that can trace any of these transactions. The transactions are traceable. Don't forget that it's not that you can't work out where A to B or where the transaction came from and where it's going. In fact, that's a central part of our new legislation. You have to be able to do that.
That's a good segue, because
so it's used for it's the basis of terrorist financing, and then you have all those things like Silk Road and those types of sites, but that's available elsewhere too.
Yes, thanks, Mike. That's a good segue into why it's important for us to have regulation and why the risk factor. You started talking about the opportunity, but then ended up talking about the risk. So Iona, can you outline for us, what the regulation is in terms of the BVI, and also provide for us outline of the opportunities, particularly when we examine the regulatory space?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Elise. And it's great to be on this panel. I suppose just to go back to that kind of poll everyone did, obviously risk is the big thing that we're trying to mitigate here. And the whole kind of raison d'etre of regulation is to help mitigate risk. So while I appreciate some people may find it boring, some people may find it a nuisance, it is essential in today's world to have regulation and robust regulatory frameworks to protect consumers and prevent bad actors from abusing the digital assets universe. So ultimately, regulation is a necessary evil, and we should see it as a factor that's actually very beneficial in pushing the sector forward. So in terms of the BVI and its competitive advantage in the regulatory space, it was actually been very quick to position itself as a crypto-friendly, and I know I'm using that word crypto again, but digital assets, virtual assets friendly jurisdiction with a commercial but risk-aware regulator. And unusually, in comparison to some of the other jurisdictions that have been implementing regulations in this space, there's been high industry and regulator engagement early on. So many of you that are local to the BVI would have been to the recent Meet the Regulator Forum. The BVI, there's been BVI delegations recently sent out to London and Asia to spread the word on the Virtual Assets Act that we have here. We've got a digital asset working group, which many of us on this call are members of. And also we're, of course, running this webinar series to help engage the financial services kind of public and spread the word really in terms of how BVI is regulating this sector. So it started pretty early on. So in 2020, the FSC put out guidance on the regulation of virtual assets. This was it before we even had an act, but it's still very useful today for drawing the line between traditional securities and virtual assets regulation. So, for example, where the line is between, between the different pieces of legislation that we have, so the Securities and Investments Business Act, and also the Virtual Assets Act, where you have instruments such as crypto futures or crypto options, which can kind of walk the line between both types of traditional finance and virtual assets. In addition to that, we've had later on that year, so October 2020, the BVI opened up its regulatory sandbox, which has been open to applications now for quite a few years, and it accepts institutional applicants that intend to offer an innovative fintech business model. So this can be the development or implementation of a new system, mechanism, idea, or other type of arrangement through the use of technology to help enhance, create, or promote a product or service in relation to financial services business. So we've already had quite a few applicants. There's been participants in the sandbox, and it's great to have that tool out there, and also to really think about that and promote that when you're speaking with clients. If you're in the financial services sector, and remind them that we've got that tool there, which again helps promote regulator engagement and the use of kind of innovative fintech in the BVI. So we've also, as Elise and many others, Mike as well mentioned earlier, we've got our VASP, so Virtual Asset Service Provider Act, which came into force on the 1st of February this year. It is it's taken from and kind of inspired by the FATF guidance on virtual assets. So it's a real kind of standard setter in terms of, there are many elements there which the international community kind of recognizes. So it provides that good level playing field when the BVI is dealing internationally with other jurisdictions which have got their own regulations. So there's that kind of commonality in terms of standards, which the Act has brought into force. There was a grace period of 6 months, which is passed now. So that ended on the 31st of July, and that was for incumbent operators. So those businesses that were falling within scope of the Virtual Assets Act, when it came into force on the 1st of February, they had 6 months to get their applications into the Financial Services Commission. And we know that 68 applications were submitted to the regulator, and they've been processing those since, and probably about half have heard back now in terms of applications. So that's not bad going, bearing in mind that this is a brand new sector, and the entire the entire world is still feeling its way in terms of regulating this arena. So about half the applicants have heard back. We understand from the Financial Services Commission that by the end of the year, they're hopeful that the rest of the applicants will have heard back on the initial kind of feedback and follow-up requests. And it may well be that by the end of Q1 next year, the first kind of round of applicants will see their approvals. This is obviously subject to applicants replying in a timely fashion to the FSC and providing complete and kind of accurate responses to their questions. But all in all, is pretty positive. We're seeing a lot of movement. We're also in a great position now as an industry, since we've already had about half the applications, have heard back, to advise new applicants in terms of what the regulator expects. So we've got that kind of standard setting. The regulatory expectations are starting to become really quite clear. So I think we're now in a pretty robust position as an industry to be advising not only the existing players that were in the BVI, but also the new entrants, the ones that are looking to set up shop. And also to reassure them that, we've got a clear path forward and that we know how to do this. So I think in the regulatory space, the BVI is doing really well. Like I said, unusual. I was actually in the Cayman Islands before this, so, unusual to have such regulatory engagement so early on in the process. And I think we shouldn't take that for granted. It's brilliant to see the FSC out there speaking to the public. And I think, don't want to drop the bomb in Elise, but I think we may have a special speaker for part 2 of this webinar, which everyone should look forward to. So it's very much, I think, a positive arena in terms of regulation. And it's also not just the financial services sector that will benefit, but the whole ecosystem. So I think maybe on that note, I'll hand back over to Elise to kind of take us forward to the next topic.
So thank you very much, Iona. And yes, we will have, we've invited the regulator to be on part 2, and which will be focused more on the regulation as well as the application and the application process. And we hope to have some experienced persons who have gone through the application process or going through the application process and working with the commission very closely. So we look forward to part 2 of this webinar. I've put up on the screen our next poll question. How important is crypto to your business? How important is crypto to your business? So please vote on that. Kayla, we are seeing from this poll that I think many people on this session today feel that crypto is quite an important to their business. What are some of the regulatory aspects with regards to the global evolution of this regulation that people have to be concerned with?
Sure, thanks, Elise, and it's a pleasure to be speaking to everyone today. So my exposure and involvement in sort of the digital assets space is mainly limited to advising on what these businesses may need to consider from a global tax transparency and reporting perspective. So similar to regulatory matters, generally may not be the most exciting topic, but very important to consider as we go forward. Now, I know the word expert's been thrown around a couple of times. I must caveat, I am not an expert on digital assets generally, so certainly defer to my other panelists on a number of points today. However, I do work with our blockchain and digital asset specialists based in the US, really to advise clients on the emerging tax requirements in this space, which very happy to kind of go through at a high level today. I'm sure you're all aware there's been a huge focus on improving tax transparency globally for many years now. Following the rapid growth in digital assets, the OECD, EU, and individual tax authorities such as the IRS and HMRC, they've really been grappling with basically how to effectively monitor and enforce tax compliance by individuals and entities operating in the digital asset space. We've heard a lot today about all the unique aspects of digital assets and how this leads to both opportunities and risks, and this is also the case in the tax world. We know that digital assets can be transferred and held without really interacting with any of the traditional financial intermediaries. And as a result, it's been recognized that tax authorities have very much reduced visibility regarding the activities carried out. And without that visibility, it is very difficult to tax this activity and to monitor tax compliance. So the implementation of the tax-related requirements, they've definitely lagged even behind other regulatory developments such as the VASP legislation, but we're really now starting to see this gain traction globally. And in terms of some recent developments, there are a few things I wanted to touch on today as we consider where the industry is going and what we need to be abreast of as advisors. And these would include the OECD's crypto asset reporting framework, as well as amendments to the Common Reporting Standard, proposed US Treasury regulations on digital asset reporting, which could impact some BVI entities, even though they are, it is a US regulation, as well as EU's DAC 8 requirements. So starting with the crypto asset reporting framework, it's commonly referred to as CARF. I know there's been lots of discussion around the terms used, whether it's crypto, digital assets, virtual assets. The OECD has gone with crypto, despite the requirements applying to a variety of types of digital assets. I think maybe CARF had a better ring than JARF, and that's purely why they went with crypto instead of digital assets, but not sure. Essentially, CARF is a CRS equivalent. So it represents a new tax transparency framework that really will require VASP-like entities to report information about their customers, which is then going to be exchanged with other tax authorities around the world. So this, like I said, will apply to entities or individuals that provide services effectuating exchanges of digital assets. We do expect it to be aligned to VASP, but as with anything, the first step will be to undertake a sort of a classification assessment under the CARF the CARF rules and definitions to see who's ultimately in scope. Now, I won't go through, there's lots of guidelines out there around what exactly will need to get reported, who needs to report by when. But the key thing I think to highlight for CARF is that it will be a transactional reporting regime. So as opposed to reporting the value of an asset at the end of the reporting period, you really need to have mechanisms in place to track the value of transactions at the point of transaction. And the reporting will be done on a transactional basis, which is a lot more complex for our clients, and really speaks to us encouraging them to start now and get those systems in place. Now, in terms of the timing and for the implementation of CARF, it was hot off the presses about 2.5 weeks ago. There were 48 early adopter jurisdictions that publicly committed to implement CARF starting with 2026. So that would mean the first reporting and exchange of information would take place in 2027. Early adopters include jurisdictions such as the US and the UK. It includes a number of EU countries, as well as the Crown Dependencies, Cayman, Barbados. You'll hear I haven't mentioned BVI. So notably, BVI is not currently listed as one of these early adopter jurisdictions, but it will still be important to monitor this. CARF is optional, but as we've seen with almost every OECD tax transparency requirement, there is going to be a lot of international pressure to implement this. So I think we can reasonably expect that to come to the BVI perhaps within a year or two of the early adopter jurisdictions. So just another point that it's important to start looking at this now.
So, Kayla, you're saying that BVI is not one of the early adopters, and essentially it's not going to come into effect in the next couple of years, but it's important for persons who are involved in this business to start to prepare. Will it be retroactive? Do you think it's going to be retroactive? And what do they need to be putting in place when the BVI does sign up, if it eventually does?
Yeah, we don't expect that it would be retroactive. Oftentimes these OECD requirements don't have a look back clause in them. But in terms of what to start looking at now, first of all, just assessing that when it does come in, doing that classification assessment, who's actually going to be in scope, and then starting what we learned from FATCA and CRS, that it is a lot harder to go back and put procedures in place than it is to do it at the outset of a business. So things like collecting self-certification forms and tax ID numbers, putting in place systems that you can track the value of the transaction at the point of the transaction. So even where there's crypto to crypto transactions, you do need to translate that to a fiat currency at the point of transaction. So systems, procedures, and due diligence requirements at the outset will really reduce the pain when these do come. And I think we should all be operating on the assumption that CARF will be implemented. It just might not be as part of the early adopter group. Okay.
With that, we're going to start taking some of the questions from our audience.